Hi there. Today I want to talk about painting in a series and drawing in a series. Most of the great sort of painters painted their favourite subjects over and over. Monet painted the haystacks and the water lilies, and he made several paintings of Rouen Cathedral. Cézanne would paint the same scene in the south of France over and over and over, usually under different lighting conditions, or they used a different colour palette, etc. Even modern day painters, any art book you look on a shelf, you'll see they recommend painting the same subject using different colours or slightly different style. And the whole point of that is that you tend to, after you've painted, let's say for example, a crab's claw, if you paint that crab's claw a couple of times, or maybe even better, about 6 times. I know that might seem a lot, but what will happen is by painting it 6 times, using the limitations of that shape, so that the shape is the thing that stays the same, but then you have to change the colours, the tones, and maybe even the application of the paint. What happens then is that by working within limits, you start to find your own artistic voice and your own style, because only you can put a certain amount of pressure that you put on the brush. Only you pick up that slightly different amount of water that somebody else might not pick up, and only you mix colours the way you mix colours. Everyone will have a slight variation. It's practically impossible to mix the same colour even twice, let alone for 2 people to mix the same colour. It's quite hard. So that's all good news for your individuality and for your own style, if that's what you're after. Apart from that, working in a series really gets you strong, confident knowledge of your subject. And again, like playing musical scales, once you've really got the scales off pat, then you can start to be quite creative and play with a bit more of a flourish and with a bit more panache than if you didn't know your scales. It's all about practice, obviously. But so for this exercise, I've just picked 4 random crab claws. Okay, now you can do a Google search and pick up these images, or you can take your own photographs. These are going to change beyond recognition, really, from what I've taken off the internet. A good site to use is Pixabay, pixabay.com. That's a royalty-free site, and you can use the images for commercial use. And all they ask is you make a little donation via PayPal for a coffee or something. So it's a very good site. So I've just picked some images that I really like. Then I've done some freehand drawings of 2 of them in a little sketchbook. I'm going to do 2 more for you now. And then when I've done the 4 of them, I'm going to pick 1, and then I'm going to have a go of roughly basing my 4 renditions on some of the colourways and some of the textures that I can see in the 4 images I found on the internet. So they're just going to help me as a springboard. I'm not going to copy them slavishly. For example, with this one, it's sort of red and blue, but I might decide to paint it purple and orange. Who knows? It's just a starting point, something to get your imagination going. So I'm just going to put the camera on pause, and then I'm going to start my freehand drawing of the last 2 crab claws. Okay, for this drawing exercise, I've got an absolutely gorgeous pencil. It's called Kohinoor Hardmouth, and it's a Toison d'Or, and it's a 7B, and it's just got a gorgeous velvety feel about it. So again, with the contour drawing, the idea is that you look at your paper, the drawing paper, a lot less than you actually look at your subject, your reference photograph. The trick is to go quite slowly and sensitively and sort of feel your way around. And another thing that is good to do is to just try and keep the pencil in contact with the paper the whole time. Try not to lift it off, even when you change direction. What I'm going to do now is say here, for example, on this tip, if I want to change direction, or say skip across to the other pincher, I can just very lightly make a joining line. It's so faint you can hardly see it, but it saves you losing contact with the paper. And so you're doing this very sensitive, tentative type of sketching. And it's nice, isn't it, to actually do something slowly? Because all day long we just rush, whether we're in a car or we're at home or we're at work. Everything seems to have to be done at breakneck speed and with your heart in your mouth. So this is a real luxury to be able to just slow down and just feel your way in a drawing. And again, as I've mentioned in another clip, it's not so much the end result. I'm not really bothered how well the sketch turns out. I'm just enjoying the pencil moving on the paper and letting my eye observe, and then my pencil making a mark. Because it's all about observation. And every time you spend time like this just observing, you become more and more confident and sure of yourself. You get to learn angles a lot better, and you get to know what a bit more pressure makes on the paper, if you want a harder mark or a lighter mark. So all this observation counts for a lot, even though people might say, oh, it's just doodling and you're not making a finished piece of work. Well, you need to do this, just unfinished work. It's not all about perfection all the time. Can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, as they say. So if you're prepared to draw badly for a while as a beginner, good for you. Give yourself permission to just, be a bit awkward and whatever. I'm just going to straighten that up. If I do any correction, I'm not going to get an eraser out, that's for sure. If I do any correction, I'll do what I just did there. I just sort of loop back on a line that might want to just fatten out a little bit. So with the crab's claw, it's just got so many organic, curvy shapes. It's an incredible piece of engineering, really. All made by Mother Nature. You won't get more strange shapes than in nature, will you? So I'm nearing the end of this drawing now. It's a bit like walking meditation, but for your fingers. And the slower the slower you go, the more you'll get the feel of the shape of the thing that you're drawing, whatever your subject is. And you'll know it. And it will imprint on you. And that's what I like about drawing. It's honesty. It's just you responding honestly as only you can respond to the thing that you're drawing. I'm going back over the drawing now in places because I just want to use this velvety pencil to just put a few darker lines here and there. Bit of contrast. I'm going to skip across. There's quite a lot of, looks a bit like a dinosaur's jaw actually, with all those teeth, but they're not actually teeth. They're little sort of jagged gripping bits in the actual claw, the pincher. I like to put sort of darker shading in the joints there to sort of indicate, where it might be out of the light a little bit. But I don't want to get too much into a tonal sketch. This is meant to be just a contour sketch now. Okay, so it's got some lovely curvy shapes. It's gorgeous. So that's my third crab claw. I'm going to move on now to the last one, the fourth one. See if I can get this in a nice position. Okay, there. Right, for the next one, I think I'm going to draw it this way. Yeah, is that looking okay? So I'm going to draw it this way, so I'm just going to change my... Okay, so I'm just going to start up here. I'm trying to use sort of the full size of the page, just to give myself plenty of room to go wrong. And if my crab sort of spreads or splurges sort of in an ungainly way, it won't matter because I still have lots of paper left to fit it on somehow. I love the sort of some of the crab claw images that I've found. The tips of the claws are black, you know, and it contrasts amazingly with the bright colours on the rest of the claw in some of them. And again, that's what attracted me to this particular subject, was the contrast, dramatic, typical artist, like a bit of drama, don't we? So I like the contrast, the opportunities for really playing with bold colour when it comes down to the painting of these claws. I mean, I'm taking probably roughly 5 or 7 minutes to do this, but you could take as long as you like. When I first started learning to draw, I used to take like 20 minutes or more and just go so slowly that it was barely perceptible that the pencil was moving on the paper even. I mean, it was like in a sort of trance, and it was a lovely luxury to be able to just do that as a drawing exercise. And I'd recommend that because nothing good was ever done in a hurry, was it? And drawing slowly, believe me, it will add to your perception and your sensitivity. You'll just come on in leaps and bounds, and it's just a joy to draw. Nobody can take this away from you. This is your impression of your subject. And so then when you come to do a painting of this, it'll be, unique. Your impression of the claw will be unique. And I could say here now as well, as this is just an approach that you could use. If you've done this drawing and you've spent a long time on it, etc., and then you think, but now I've got to get it onto watercolour paper. Well, personally, this is a way you can do it. I don't see anything wrong with coming along with some very fine tracing paper and tracing this image that you've drawn, and then using trace down or Surreal, that trace down black stuff, getting it onto your watercolour paper that way. It's up to you. But at the end of the day, you've already done the freehand drawing, so your interpretation of it is there. Okay? So it's just a tip. If I know most people are doing art in busy life, they're working, they haven't got time to draw everything twice, but they want to get on with their watercolour. So that's a sort of option that you can use if you want. As I'm drawing, I'm consciously trying to put less pressure sometimes and more pressure other times. And I'm also doing these little sort of twirls. Don't know if you can quite make that out. I'll just tip it down a bit more to do the last bit. So I'm coming along, and as I'm drawing, I sort of go like that. Just make a little whimsical sort of caprice type shape. Like that, just to break up the line, so that the line is a little bit sort of frilly. That's just me. You don't have to do that. But what the heck, I'm just spinning off these curves and making the most of these curves that are giving me a chance to do things like that. Okay, so that's that one done now. So, if I zoom out. So there they are. I really like this one because it's really big and chunky. This is a little bit samey, you know, the design on the page, it's a bit of a plainish shape. This has got a lot more interest for me because this is the positive image and then this is the negative image all around it. And the space around the image is quite interesting as well. I like this one, but I don't like this part. And I like this one as well. So while I'm deliberating, I'm just going to turn the camera off, okay? Okay, I've decided, very hard choice to make. I've decided on this one. I really like this one. What I'm going to do is just extend it a bit more, like that. Because what I want is for this drawing to be hinged to one of the edges. Because when I start drawing it in my prepared mini boxes, I want this to hinge from there so that I've got all of this as the positive shape and then all of this as the negative shape. Because really both are of equal importance and value in a painting. They both have a role to play. So what I've done here is I've got a piece of stretched watercolour paper. It happens to be 100% cotton rag. It's by Fabriano Artistico. Lovely paper. Then I've obviously stretched it yesterday to expand it and tape it in that expanded state. It's dry now. It's had overnight to dry. So when I start to paint on it, it won't buckle. Also, I've taped some masking tape all around and in the centre to section off my mini painting areas. And also then, when I finish each painting and it's dry, I peel off the masking tape and I've got a lovely white edge all around. So it looks like a finished, you know, original. And I just like doing that sense of completion. So let's start. I'm going to start transferring these now onto here. Again, I'll probably not get it exactly, but I'm going to try and do my best to get 4 very similar crab claws. If you haven't got time to do this, just what you can do is photograph it or scan it, print it a bit smaller or to roughly the size of these shapes, and then trace them down. Okay, that's another way of working, just for the purposes of working in a series to get this practice in. Okay, so let's get started on this one. So that comes out there. Okay, now for the actual pincher bits. It's funny drawing this, it's almost like the little countries. It's like a map, it's like cartography, the shapes of these sort of convoluted bits of bone or shell or whatever it's made of are all very strange. And again, by going slowly, you have time to sort of daydream about stuff like that. And daydreaming is good, isn't it? It's free. Okay, so that's roughly it. See, I'm not that brilliant at copying, but it'll do. It'll do. So I'm going to turn the camera off now, and basically, while the camera's off, I'm going to draw 3 more. Okay, see you back in the next clip. Okay, so all done. Well, doing that exercise really, I find it really peaceful doing that. It's made me love the beauty of a line even more, and now I'm really excited about the options now that I've got for painting these. So the main thing that I'm going to do to sort of help me with this painting in a series idea is I'm going to do a tonal sketch of the crab's claw. So I'm going to look at my original photograph, which was that one. There it is, basically. Okay, and I'm going to squint at it, and by squinting at your picture, you tend to see the lights and the darks more easily, and then whatever's left is usually mid-tone. So I'm looking for 3 different tones. In the USA, they tend to call tones values. So values or tones, it's the same thing. It's the amount of light or dark that is visible in an object, and where the lights and darks are placed. So I'm going to do that next. For that exercise, I'm just going to take one of these and I'm going to paint it in grayscale. So that will give me the blueprint then upon which to base the other 3. I'll only be using that one as a sort of roadmap, as it were, for the lights and darks and mid-tones. And I'll be painting these 3 in different colours and with different textures and things. So again, I'm going to stop the camera while I get prepared to do a tonal sketch of one of these. Hi, welcome back. I'm ready now to put the tonal washes onto this crab's claw. What I've done is I've sectioned off areas to give me 3 lots of tones on the crab's claw. This area, the central area, will be white. The white of the paper will be unpainted. Then the next batch, the next layer, will be grey. So that's the sort of mid-tone. And then the outer band will be black, more or less. But as you can see, there are a couple of little chinks within some of the areas, and these will be either left white for a highlight, or they'll be sort of the mid-tone, just for a little bit of contrast. So the colour I'm going to mix up is a grey. I'm mixing a grey from French ultramarine blue and burnt umber. If you want to use Payne's grey and save yourself mixing, that's fine. Or if you want to use, one of the tube blacks, that's up to you for this exercise. I very rarely use tube black in my paintings because I find them quite deadening. I prefer to mix my blacks from 2 dark complementaries, like alizarin crimson and Thalo green, Windsor green. That gives a lovely black. Okay, so my mix now, I'm going to make sure I've got tons of this because I really, really don't want to run out halfway through the exercise. In this exercise as well, all of the work will be done wet on dry. So that means I'll be getting hard-edged tonal washes. They won't be soft at all. So let's just get plenty of this now. The only disadvantage with doing this way of mixing with a blue and a brown is that they tend to separate, as they're sitting on the palette waiting for you to put them on, you're painting, they start to sort of separate a little bit. And so when you go to start using them, you might get a slightly different tint, excuse me, of colour. So the trick is to just give it a little swoosh like this at the brush to keep all the colour incorporated and mixed to a similar consistency. As I say, if you don't fancy that amount of hassle, just use Payne's Grey. Okay, so I've loaded my brush up. I'm going to start here. So this one chink on the pincher itself, I'm going to leave as white. So I want a nice white highlight to really pop, where the curve of the pincher might catch the light. So I'm preserving that one. But all the rest of the pincher, I'm painting it mid-tone for now. Okay, and so this one and this one need to be painted the same colour, because this band of two areas includes the mid-tone and the dark. So the dark will be painted on top again once I've done this first mid-wash. So you can paint your darks with the mid-tone as well, because you'll be going over them the second time to make them dark. You need to move quite quickly to keep the paint from drying in these particular bands. So all of this is going to be the mid-tone. The only area that I'm leaving white for now is this sort of central band, and as I mentioned, these little curved highlights that might be found on the crab's claw. So I'm trying to keep that bead of paint moving all the way down the crab. Just leave that central area unpainted for now. Okay, so let's come across to this side. All of this can be mid-tone. If I was painting this and I wasn't on camera, I'd be turning my board now to make applying the paint easier, but I don't want to turn the board because I want you to see this, you know, from one viewpoint. So don't be afraid when you come to do it to just turn your board to make putting the paint on as comfortable for your, your working habits as possible. So I'm just using this sort of looping brush stroke, just looping everything, keeping it all moist and avoiding hard edges in the middle of the sort of passage of paint. I mean, it's inevitable that I get a hard edge on the outline, which is okay, we want that. And I'm leaving that as a white highlight there. And all of this pincher is going to be covered in mid-tone for now. There's a little white highlight, is sort of a rounded triangular sort of shape, slightly organic shape. And as you can see, it's drying already, starting to dry, and in the drying process we're getting a slightly patchy effect in the wash overall, which is quite nice. So there's the first wash on. So as I mentioned, we left the central strip white. Actually, I'm going to make a bridge there, a slightly irregular bridge, just so that that unifies those two parts of the claw. Okay, I've caused a bit of a back run there because this paint is more moist than the paint I brushed on half a minute ago. That's the only time you'll get a back run, if there's a differential in the wetness of your washes. If you keep them all wet, all the same wetness, you won't get back runs. Okay, so that's the first step. I'm just going to pause the camera and dry that, and then I'm going to come along and do the black, the third tone. Okay, that's bone dry now. Excuse me. What I've done before I start putting the black tone on, the darkest tone on now, is I've just redrawn some of my outlines to see where I'm going. So let's mix up a much stronger wash now, same colours, but much more viscous. Because we really want to contrast this last tone with the one we've just put on. Right, I'm just going to pull that over there because I think some purple must have been in my well. So it's gone a bit purpley. So I'll just pull it over there and just correct it. Like that looks strong enough. That's a stronger contrast than the tone I've got on already. Okay, so let's go. I'm hugging around that white highlight there. So as you can see, I'm painting over part of the mid-tone that we just painted, but I'm leaving the mid-tone unpainted, you know, as per the sort of boundary lines that I've got on. So I'm following, hugging the curves of the claw. Again, I'm trying to keep some sort of consistency and some fluidity as I apply the paint. Trying to keep my brush in contact with the paper as much as possible to maintain a smooth application of paint so that it doesn't look too patchy. So all of the pincher, you know, the tips of the claw are going to be covered in this black tone, the darkest tone. I'm just going to skim around this mid-tone area here and this white highlight here. I'm refilling the brush often so that I've got a fully charged brush with which to do this work. I'm just, as I say, trying to keep contact with the paper, then it helps everything look more coherent. And it's a good bit of practice in brush control and brush handling in it as well, if you're new to painting or new to watercolour. Because, you know, painting is like handwriting at the end of the day, isn't it? It's an expression of you. That's looking a bit ragged there, so I'm really going to try and tidy that up. Just follow that curve. Right, let's go. Okay, so that's the third tone on. So as you can see, we've got a really hard delineation between the white, the mid and the dark. So this is a 3-tone study. Okay, so most paintings have around 5 to 7 tones in them. Artists tend to use a grayscale of between 0 and 9. That tends to be the norm, because any more than that, and it's really sort of hard to have very, very refined tones. So we're working within sort of limits to make the painting readable to the viewer. So what we're doing is we're simplifying all the time. Now what can happen next is this tonal sketch can be used to paint this crab's claw, but we can do it with all soft edges. And how we do that is we would wet the entire claw, and then first of all we drop in the mid-tones while it's still wet, so we'd be using controlled wet into wet, and we'd be making sure that the paint didn't spread too much into the central white area. We could keep that in check by using the thirsty brush technique, just lifting out colour until it had dried sufficiently. And then we can add the darker tones very quickly at the end while it's still moist, and it'd still be a soft bleed, and we'd achieve that. So that's what we're going to do in the next study. I'm just looking at this, and perhaps what I might need are a few more applications of the darkest tone, just to break up and to define some of these segments in the claw a little bit more. And so this is what the tonal study gives you, is a chance to get it right, get the tonal, sketch right before you go into your painting. And any glaring errors where you're missing a tone that would help the subject become more clear, any tone can be added now at this stage before you're in full flow with your paint. And these little changes help you then be able to paint more freely when it comes to the actual painting itself. And also for interest, you can start maybe adding a few little, within the sort of mid-tone area, you can add a few little dark highlights there just for interest. As long as they don't break up, as long as they don't start to diminish this grey area too much, if I was to do too many of these black bits, it would then make it really hard to read. So it's all about just working out how far you can push it without losing the overall pattern and shape of how light is hitting your subject. Okay, so I'm going to stop there now. I'm starting to fuss with it. So what I'm going to do now is have a go of translating this hard-edged tonal study into a soft-edged tonal study. Okay, so that's coming up in the next section. Okay, hold everything. I've been looking at this tonal study, and I feel this is what the tonal study gives you, a chance to have a little think and see, right, is there enough contrast in lights and mids and darks? And overall, I feel like I need to decide on having one side of the claw slightly darker than the other to indicate, that it's slightly in shade. So these two sides with the darks here are more or less the same as the darks there. So they're a bit too equal. So I'm going to just come in and fatten them on this side. So I'm just applying more of the same colour tone. I'll redo that outer area there. I'm just making them a bit wider, and I'm also going to lose some of the highlights and diminish some of the highlights, because I've decided that I needed to say that this side of the claw was more in darkness than this side. So something has to go. And again, if you're trying to paint anything and you haven't made these decisions, it's really more tricky to do when your painting's in full flow and everything's wet and you start to sort of panic. So also down here, let's have this a bit wider. So I'm going to cut in to that mid-tone a bit more with the darkest tone. And I'm even going to encroach like that into the white area a little bit. So I feel it needs to have more dark, and on this section, let's creep in to that mid-tone more. And maybe go over to the centre a little bit. So I'm just reapplying the darkest tone. And I'm going to paint up into the bits that were already very dark to slightly dislodge the paint and make it unify a bit more with this fresh second wash. Okay, I feel like I want to cut in there a bit more as well. Okay, so this black section, this dark section now is definitely wider than the one over here. Let's cut some of that. This is the point of doing the tonal sketch, is to correct before you get painting. Okay, that's better. Yeah, I feel there's more contrast there now. Okay, so I'm going to dry that, and then we'll start to paint this in a soft edged fashion in contrast to this hard edged fashion. Right, now we're ready to roll. We've got our tonal sketch, our tonal study. So we can use this now if we want. Again, this is just an approach. We can use this now to help us paint any amount of crab's claws in any colours and in any type of painting, wet into wet, wet on dry, etc. You know, if you use other media, you can use it to paint a pastel crab's claw, an oil painting crab's claw, whatever, any medium will do it. Because what you've done now is you've spent the time working out the patterning of light and dark on your subject, and that's basically all a tonal study is. As I say, usually I think in the USA they use the term value, a value study. In the UK we say tone, but it's all about light and dark. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to keep this somewhere visible to help me and to remind me where my lights and darks are going. And I'm going to paint this crab's claw. I'll do this one. I'll zoom in on this one so it's easier to see. This crab's claw, wet into wet. So I'm going to start adding clear water to the whole inside of the shape. Right, so I'm just going to pause the camera while I do that, because that takes time. And the videos take too long to upload. So I'm using clear water, okay, to wet just only inside the whole of the crab's shape. So back in a second. Hi, I've wet the whole inside of the crab's claw now with clear water. If I can just show you that. Can you see that slight sheen on there? That's almost ready now to start dropping in the first washes. I'm waiting a few seconds though, because it's still a little bit, there are still some sort of heavier pockets of water, and I just want it to soak in a little bit more. You need to take a lot of care with this, so I come in and just make sure that, you know, all the outline, this is a size 3 brush, all the outlines, those tiny little details of the pinchers there, have had a little bit of moisture pushed right into their outer limits so that when we put the wash on, it'll flow in all those areas really nicely. Okay, so if I can just show it you this way. Yeah, it's hard to pick up the light. Right, there we are. Can you see there's a bit of a bank of water building up there? That's too wet, right? So just lay it flat and just push that water back in, just share it around some other areas that might be getting a little bit too dry. What you don't want is for the painting to become damp. When it's damp, there's no shine on the paper, and that's not really good for putting in wet into wet. It's best to have that surface sheen going on, okay? So we've got that surface sheen. I'm going to start applying now my grey wash. This is about the dilution of it. It's a thin cream, I'd say, alright? If I pick my brush up, it's not dripping off there, but it's still moist enough to flow on. One thing we also need to have at the ready is a good, say 1/2 inch flat brush, which I'm going to moisten, and this is important as well. When you're moistening brushes, a lot of beginners, they just put it in like that, right? Well, that's, as you can see, half the hairs are not moist. You really need to bang it on the base. See all the air bubbles coming out? Tons of air bubbles. You really need to soak your brush right through to the core, because then it'll act as a good eraser for you. It'll lift off colour really well. If you don't wet it properly, you can't pick up paint properly, you can't put paint on properly, and you can't lift it off in the thirsty brush technique. So I'm getting rid of all the air bubbles there. Now I need a flannel, and I'm gonna clean part, wipe most of the moisture off that. Okay, so that looks almost dry now, but it's just right for lifting colour out, which we'll need in a second, as you'll see. Right, while I've been chatting to you, things have gone a bit damp. It literally takes a few seconds. The tips now have gone damp, so I'm just going to slightly re-moisten those tips. Not tons of water, just a bit more water to keep it all shining. Just with that faint shine on there. I know this might seem a bit extreme and fussy, but I'm just showing you how fussy you can be. It's up to you how fussy you want to be. But this is how I paint. Okay, so I've got my colours ready now. So I've got my mix, my shadow mix colour. So I'm going to put this on, and I'm going to keep my little value map to the side there to help remind me just where I want to go. And how far in I want to go with this initial grey wash. And as you can see, the wash is getting a soft edge, but it's not flaring too wildly out of control, is it? There's a bit of a white highlight there. Now, can you see us bleeding in a bit? Don't panic about that. We'll lift it out in a second. Just want to get some main, there's a white highlight there as well, which I'm going to go around. There's a highlight there. So I'm loading up often, as you can see, alright? I'm getting the shadow colour on, and I'm sort of going into the centre a bit there. This is why it's important to wet your paper first, because I'll be able to lift out those highlights quite easily because of this moisture that we've put on the paper. If I hadn't wet the paper, you know, it'd be much harder to lift them out. So all of this, apart from that little oval there, is going to be in this mid-tone. And again, I'm doing this quite quickly because as I'm talking to you, the paper is drying. Right, so what else is dark? So that's dark there. Okay, okay, that. I'm leaving this middle central streak white, as you can see. Let's just go around that oval shape again, so when I lift it out, it's more visible. Okay, what I like to do as well is I just like to tilt my board. Can you see that faint sheen? That's perfect for watercolour wet into wet. You don't want it any wetter than that, and you don't want it any drier than that. This is the middle ground, okay? So I'm just tilting it, leaving it at about 40 degrees, 45 degrees, giving the paint a chance to creep over there. I guess zoom in, you can see it's creeping a little bit. That's what we want. And when it's crept that way, let's tilt it and let it creep this away. And doing this exercise, you know, gives you a good handle on how watercolour works, how far it'll creep, in what conditions, how moist the paper needs to be, all that stuff. And this is why I recommend doing small studies of things, because if you can get a handle on it in a small study, you won't be so anxious then when you can do a big landscape or something, will you? Okay, so let's zoom back in on that now. Right, so that central highlight is staying quite nicely. It's not being lost too badly. So there's my original, you know, plan. That's my plan. This is wet into wet now. So I want a soft-edged look on this. So if any of the paint is creeping in too far, I'm going to use this thirsty brush, the brush that I moistened really well, then dried on a flannel, and I'm reshaping it. I'm just going to press it in and wiggle it and lift out any colour that's, you know, going too far into that central area. And then rinse that brush, because you've picked up a load of paint now. Rinse it and dry it again. Then let's go for that highlight there. It's held pretty well in our initial application, but by pressing this thirsty 1/2 inch brush into it, you can just define that highlight a bit more. Okay, so rinse again. Then there's a highlight on this pincher. So press that, I'm pressing the corner of the brush in and just wiping, you might need to do a few strokes, just wipe the colour off and it'll end up being a soft highlight on the claw, okay? Then this one, that's got lost completely, but we can lift it out. Just press the brush in. Actually, I think I might swap to a slightly smaller flat now, because we're getting into tiny areas. So again, I'm moistening my brush. Sorry to labour this point, but I see a lot of students doing this. They don't wet their brush, so to wet it thoroughly, see all the air bubbles coming out there, just bang it on the base of your jug a couple of times. Just splay it gently. It'll cope. It's quite a robust. The brushes are quite robust. Then dry it all down the handle so there's no runners. And then you've got a thirsty brush ready now to pick up that highlight. So press it in. Put a bit of pressure on that. And then you've lifted out that highlight. Let's go over to the other shoulder, and there's a highlight there. If you find you're not lifting off enough colour, it's probably because you haven't rinsed your brush in between lifts, or you're not pressing hard enough. So just don't be afraid, put a bit of pressure on there. Now I need to work quickly, because now we need to put the final darkest tones in. And we want to do this while the painting is still moist. Okay, so now we'll come in and we'll put all the really dark tones in. Be as quick as you can, following the pattern of your blueprint that you did earlier. So this now is the final dark tone. And this will give us a soft edged final dark. Dried a little bit too much on the pinchers. Actually, that comes around there a little bit. Because as you can see, it's not flaring there. It's flared softly here, but it hasn't flared as much there. That's because I've let it get too dry. So this is, again, it's a good exercise in seeing, well, how wet is wet? How wet do you need it to be for it to give a soft edge? And getting to know that, this is a good exercise to help you. And it's gone a bit dry down there as well. Okay, so you can see we got softer edges where it was moist, more moist, and harder edges where it wasn't moist enough. So to correct those hard edges, you can do this. Use a moist brush technique. So you take a small, say size 3 brush, moisten it. You flick it, okay? But you don't dry it on a flannel. And then you come along and just touch in to the very edge of the piece of colour you've just put on. And that will just allow you to soften that colour in. And there, let's soften all that. So I'm just softening it by touching into the edge. I've caused another sort of tide mark there now. So I'm going to rinse my brush again, flick it, keep the moisture in the edge of that brush, and then work on that little edge and blend that away to nothing, so that that edge is less visible. I'm flicking again and working on this edge because this hasn't softened as much as I'd like. So I'm just working and wiggling the brush, holding the hairs of the brush are quite almost flat to the paper. So that's softening a bit more. This is quite, this hasn't gone as soft as I'd like either. So again, I'm going to use that moist small brush and just touch in and rotate all around to dislodge that hard black line a little bit more. You might need to wiggle your brush on it a few seconds to soften it off. So this is moist brush technique. This could be a bit softer. The central bit is nice, I'm happy with the softening there. And this is definitely all way too hard, so I'm just going to re-moisten all of the black paint I just put around there to activate it. And then I'm going to rinse my brush again and try and flick it so there's no droplet on there, but there's moisture in the brush, and then just touch into that hard line. Rotate, sort of straddling it. I'm straddling it with the brush, half on the black paint, half on the paler wash underneath. And just go round and round until you loosen it all and it starts softening. and then you can take it right out to the edge. Still a little bit hard, so again, moist brush, and just rotate again. So now that's much softer. So let's look for any more hard edges there. Where are there any more hard edges? Right. Okay, a few there. Let's soften that a bit. That one. It's just tiny little rotating movement. And definitely these two here. So let's try and just, these are very tiny, quite hard areas to soften because they're so small, but we can make a dent in it. I could have avoided all of this if I just worked a bit quicker. Okay, so that definitely is very, very hard. So I'm going to moisten all of the surrounding dark area. Rinse my brush again. Rinse it, don't dry it. You must flick the bead of water off, then just work that hard edge. Minute little rotating action. I mean, this is really fussy fine work, but if you want to retrieve a hard edge and make it a soft edge, this is one way of doing it. Okay, so as I look at that now, it's much softer. Okay, well we're ready now to do the next crab claw, which we're going to do in cold colours. Alright, so there's the difference. There's your hard edged crab and there's your soft edged crab. Okay, see you in the next clip. Hi again. I've just been looking at this second soft-edged crab claw that we've done, and I feel like I need to correct it a little bit here because that pincher is much darker in tone than my second soft one, and I think some of the black here needs to be redone. So now's a good opportunity for me to show you how you can correct and go on top of a watercolour to add another soft-edged passage of colour. Alright, so this is absolutely bone dry now. This is important. It must be bone dry. If I try and correct on something that's slightly damp, you'll end up with backruns, blooms and cabbages. So what I need to do is to just very softly and very gently re-moisten the section with clear water. Literally, I'm just laying the water on. I'm not using brush strokes, I'm not, being heavy-handed, I'm being as soft as I can and taking all that moisture past the area that I'm going to paint so that there will be no backgrounds. So basically I'm reactivating this whole wide half, the whole wideish half of the crab claw, so that I can get an extra dark wash in there and let that settle in gently. Okay, so I've just moistened all of that, and there you can see it's just moist. Right, so very quickly I'm going to go in with a much darker mix. Just want to accentuate that. Definitely that one pincher is way too weak. Okay, for our tonal study. So let's mix that burnt umber and French ultramarine blue again. Right, that's looking a lot stronger now. That should show up okay. Got a few blue blobs there. Need to work those in. Beware of that, little sort of blobs of paint, because if you don't dissolve them, they'll just show up just where you don't want them in your work. Okay, so I need to work quickly now to get this in. Actually, it's gone a little bit dry again. So literally, again, with a size 6 moist brush, just float in another little veil of moisture. hardly touching the paper at all, so that this previous wash that we did earlier on today won't be disturbed. So I'm just using this sort of looping action back and forth to re-moisten this area. Okay, let's get this dark area on. So I'm looking at my pattern there. It's definitely, yeah, that's more like it. That's how dark I need to go. It was just too pale. That's showing up. There's more contrast now. It's much stronger. There we go. I'm just looking and contrasting my value sketch with what I've got at the moment. So that's going around there a little bit. Goes around there. Keys in there. Okay, so that's stronger. And we've still got a nice soft edge. So now I'm going to wet this area here, because this area could do with a little bit more of darkening as well. So again, moist brush, just float in a layer of water as lightly as you can. And then straight away come in with that stronger dark mix. Yeah, I missed that bit. It sort of cuts across part of the joint in the claw, and this is going on now, and it's wet into wet, so it's a lot softer. Okay, that's a bit more defined now. So what I need to do now is just lift out the highlights that I've lost again now. So I'm moistening a flat 1/4 inch brush, drying it on a flannel, and then pressing in again just to retrieve the white of the paper once more. Lost this one a little bit as well, so I'll just do a few dabs. You might need to do it a few times just to dislodge the paint sufficiently to get back to the white. That's a bit better. And same again here on the pincher. Okay, so this is a little bit hard here, so I'm using the moist brush again just to soften that edge and soften it on this side. Okay, so I feel that that's a lot softer now. This is definitely a hard edged tonal study, and this is more of a soft edged tonal study. Okay, so next up we'll be doing a crab's claw in cold colours. So we'll see you in the next clip.